Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. What do you get when you combine more than 10 years of talk radio experience with a conservative Christian, historical constitutionalist who has an unbridled opinion, rapier wit, and a gift for the uncommon and little-known historical facts about America? That can only describe one person, and he's not only a friend of mine for many years, but he's the host of HeartOfAmerica.net and the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on the Earth. And he is the latest addition to our incredible roster of featured guests. And he appears here on the third Monday of every month at 10 o'clock, none other than Michael Hart himself. Michael, welcome in to this edition of Revealing the Truth, really the Michael Hart Unknown America edition of Revealing the Truth. Good to see you, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. What is new and exciting in the Heart of America world?
Well, we just got finished with our live broadcast about 45 minutes ago. We were talking about a lot of the polls that have come out that places Joe Biden 10 points ahead of Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders 9 points. Apparently, Trump is losing to pretty much everybody that's a Democrat these days. And so we broke some of the poll numbers down because you point out I've been doing this for the better part of 10 years. And the polling had Donald Trump significantly behind Hillary Clinton. So you and I both know the value of polling and pollsters. And of course, this is quite early into the campaign season. So that was a big part of what we discussed today.
You know, when I read the headline that Trump is behind in the polls, it was actually at the exact same time he was in Poland. And he was giving a speech there. So I said, you know, of course he's behind the polls. He's been behind the polls. He's for Poland. He's a favorite son of Poland. And, you know, the whole idea, the whole concept of this president who has contributed more to economic stability, economic growth. Some of the programs that he has implemented are really stunning. And the fact that he was elected on a couple of very key points. One was border security. He did not get his wall. And so that was going to be the Jessica Rabbit punch to him throughout. Everybody expected through the 2020 campaign that this was going to be, you're going to get him on the fact that he failed. So he turns around and he gets Mexico, and he says to Mexico, listen, we're going to cut off your economic bloodline unless you step up and you start defending your border. So they now have 6,000 troops on their southern border protecting them from the onslaught of those who have been passing through using Mexico as a travel lane to get to America. This is nothing short of Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman kind of brilliance in strategy that is so far outside the box that it is typical, classic Donald Trump, and it is a victorious strategy.
Well, you know what's interesting? It also demonstrates that none of the Democrats and even some Republicans that are standing in defiance have not read his book, The Art of the Deal, because this comes straight from it. The moment he announced the tariffs, I was 100% convinced that it was nothing more than saber rattling. He was not, particularly because he was going to go 5% and then 30 days later amp it up to 10%. That's unachievable. That's unattainable. And it would have had a negative impact on the U.S. economy. But he knew darn good and well what he was doing. The Mexicans were going to have to capitulate because a lot of people don't realize that we import an enormous amount of petroleum-based products from Mexico, and they don't want to be in that trade war with us. So yet again, he's demonstrated an ability and a willingness to sidestep the Democrat leadership, because when it comes to foreign policy, with a special emphasis on trade, we now realize they don't know anything about what they're talking about.
I don't understand how, here we have Lindsey Graham, who has become the most outspoken, shockingly so. I think that he has become such a Donald Trump advocate that he's almost pulled away from the pack makes me think that he may be considering a 2024 run for the presidency. He's become the champion, absolute spokesperson, getting behind this and saying, you people, Republicans, Democrats, are looking in the wrong place. You're looking at the wrong things. He
Right.
is not a politician. So stop, you know, you and I had this conversation when people were talking about his faith. We're not electing a pastor in chief, okay? We're not electing a man who has a political CV. He doesn't have the political chops that these professional politicians do. He's a businessman. And if you take a look at the United States, what is our annual budget for the United States?
It's in the trillions.
It's in the trillions, okay? There's no company, no corporation in the world as large as the corporation of the United States of America, comma,
Right.
INC. So if you take a look at this as a business as opposed to a political entity, and you run it like a business, then every one of his principles apply, and you begin to look at where your barrier to entry and where your weak points, your points of pain are. You approach it as, I'm going to do something for you, okay? But in exchange for what I'm going to do for you, which is an injection into your economy, I'm going to do these kind of things for you, but in exchange, here's what I want. I want border security. I want these other things. Otherwise, it's like this, the Bible. There's the other side of the scripture. Okay, Malachi comes to mind where it says that if you don't, how do you rob God? Well, in tithes and offerings, you bring a curse on your family. So, Lord, are you saying that if I'm faithful in my tithes and offerings, I won't bring a curse on my family? I'll bring a blessing on my family. And the answer is yes, you can make that direct correlation, not adding to or taking away from Scripture, but I can look beneath, I can look underneath what God is saying. All right, and what was motivating to the people of the time was the threat of a curse, not the threat, not the promise of a blessing. And so, if this is a strategy that God has used and incorporated extremely well in the covenant relationship He has with His children and with His kingdom, then why would that not be an effective strategy? We take the art of war out of the Bible. The War College teaches biblical battle strategies. Why wouldn't we use the same economic strategies of cutting off supply chains, cutting off borders, blockades? We read through all that. I mean, wasn't the American Revolution, wasn't part of that a blockade?
Yeah, several actually.
It was effective. We won.
Well, that's absolutely correct, but they're more concerned about policy making because at the end of the day, this president is much more successful than they ever thought that he would be. Again, we are doubling down on the art of the deal by creating pain for these trade partners. They don't understand that we've had a policy, and it absolutely accelerated under Barack Obama, Rabbi, where we had a policy in this country for all intent and purposes, international bribery. We did the same thing with the North Koreans. You don't shoot at us, you don't threaten us with missiles, you don't test fire missiles, and then we're going to support you economically. There's been the discussion of the elimination or at least the paring back of sanctions against the North, and that's been a long time policy. Look at the money, the millions of dollars that were sent to the Iranians under the Obama administration. It's the exact same thing. It is a matter of the victim offering the bully an apple every day for not taking the rest of his lunch as opposed to learning how to use his fists. This president understands that, and he's employed the art of war, the Sun Tzu strategies, but in an economic sense. And the real irony to all this is America got exactly the president that they said that they wanted, which is one that was not a politician, but one that was more of a business person with an economic mind that is focused on international policy. And they can't stand it because they don't know how to navigate it themselves, because most of them are career politicians. If they've not been in the House and Senate for their career, they've certainly been in other elected offices. They've never run businesses. They don't understand the nuances and the machinations, and they can't figure Trump out because of their inexperience.
So we're now in this state of affairs that from a last week we had several guests in the psychological world and in books that were focused on men. And we talked about how today it's almost dangerous. It's almost, with the feminine voice growing as loud as it is, we're now on the verge of just being a man is something that puts you on the wrong side of the equation. The scales have tipped from the suffragettes and getting the vote to now wanting to dominate the world and everything in it, and all of a sudden roles are being masculine is now becoming emasculated. As we look at this same strategy, the same tactic being used by the left, it's noise, it's rhetoric, it's repeating the same things over and over again, trying to draw your attention away from what's happening, and there's absolutely no credit given for any of the accomplishments. Of course, it's always, the latest tweet and the latest disaster. How brilliant, how intentional do you think that Donald Trump is in saying these things? For example, the quote where he's having a conversation with George Stephanopoulos, and he says to him, if a foreign entity were to come to you with some information about an opposing candidate, what would you do with that information? He said, well, I would probably look at it, I'd consider it, and if it needed to be sent on to the FBI for investigation for improprieties, I would do that too. So, of course, they took half that soundbite and said that he would be open to receiving opposition intelligence. Well, is there not in every campaign a team that does nothing but look at the opposition? They look at their platform points, they look at their track record, they launch their own background investigations looking for whatever they can find out, how they voted when they were a city councilman, how they voted when they were the mayor of a city, how they voted and stood behind whatever social justice or injustice that occurred in their community. Isn't that the norm?
Absolutely is. As a matter of fact, Hillary Clinton had people, and even had one staffer that recently commented he'd be willing to travel to Europe to listen to operatives in several of the other governments if they, in fact, had uncovered opposition research. A lot of people believe, and I don't disagree, that Donald Trump was laying a trap for the obstructionists to get them, again, to do exactly what they did, come frayed at the edges and begin to accuse him of the very things they said was contained in the Mueller report. But, you and I have talked about this over the years, and people talk about whether or not the Russians tried to influence our election. And the answer to that is, well, of course they did. They've been doing that since Khrushchev was premier. This is not new. Foreign governments has been attempting to influence this relationship, and it would be politically immature and naive for a sitting president of the United States to have another foreign entity come to him and say, I have information, and to not listen to it. The hear no evil, do no evil, see no evil approach to politics does not work, especially on the international stage, and doubly especially when we're in these relationships now with North Korea, China, Russia, and other these bad actors out there. It would be very politically, again, naive on his part to suggest that I would not listen to this intelligence.
When you take a look at tomorrow is the official day of his announcing his 2020 campaign.
Right.
Everybody's been ramping up for this. You've got 22 or so Democrats who've already thrown their hat into the ring. You've got the worldwide representative for the Hair Club for Men, Joe Biden, who, the whole thing about the last election that he wasn't going to throw his hat in the ring because he promised his dying son that he wouldn't.
Right.
I haven't heard much comment about his promise to his dying son, so that worked at the time. Now, of course, he is just by name recognition alone carries the sway. Bernie Sanders is as active as he can possibly be, promoting, and now where socialism was entered into the American vernacular in the last election, it is now a platform piece being adopted by, and the other candidates being measured as to how close to the socialistic model, how much can we promise people for free in this country? Can we do health care for all? Can we do free college tuition for all? Can we put a, what was it, a chicken in every pot? Or these were the promises of a bygone era when we were a war-torn, desperate nation on the brink of financial disaster because the world economy was on the brink of total disaster. And the pictures of people with shopping carts filled with money to go buy a loaf of bread, and we see that same picture in China, or we see that picture now in Iran. I understand, but I don't understand. To the logical, rational mind, is there any logic or ration, or is this purely emotion? And is this the entire platform of the Democratic Party, is to run on a campaign of emotion?
Well, of course it is, because they don't have any viable policies that work. You know, you also had mentioned earlier about the book that I wrote, Unknown America. Most people are not up to speed on the history of America. Much of what we're seeing has been adopted from the FDR administration, the core packing plan, for example, the Works Progress Administration, et cetera, et cetera. And because people don't know their history, they don't know that we have borrowed a lot of these ideas. So it sounds really good, but no, it's absolutely emotional because you can't sell it on logic. You can't, you know, it's like the argument with the African American community. You know, we have black company upstarts up 400%, a historic black unemployment rate that's unbelievably low, and over wages in the black community. They can't let that information get out. It's got to be a matter of emotion. Go over to the abortion debate, and now it's a matter of reproductive rights, you know, as opposed to the life of the child. They are in a constant position of redefining the argument because they've got no argument that they can justify, and they know emotion is strong. And that has been a hallmark of the party for many, many, many years. Back during the Obama administration, you know, the Republicans want to kill you, take your health care away. Remember the commercials of grandma going over the cliff in the wheelchair? They've got to, it's like the old AT&T commercials about Mother's Day. You know, reach out and touch someone. Call your mom today, because everything's about emotion. And it's a matter of, if you don't vote for us, you're going to be in prison. You're going to be locked up. Biden said that. And you're going to lose out. You're going to have your life and your livelihood taken away from you by those greedy corporate Republican capitalists. And we've got to put an end to this. We owe it to the world in a justice sense. Let's give us climate change at the same time. Everything is along emotional lines because they have nothing along policy lines.
And yet, the startling ratings that came out about the other news networks other than Fox, that their ratings are dropping, meaning people are no longer buying into this narrative from a standpoint of what we consider to be quantifiable response mechanism, not polls, but actual statistical analysis of who watches what. There are a number now of sources, not the one that's always been used. Now there's multiple sources to confirm. And it seems like the American viewer that is the one who everybody's appealing to, because that's how you get them, is through the commercial, is through the interview. I find it fascinating that Fox has been doing the town halls for the Democratic Party candidates, but they've been excluded from doing the debates. So there's in some cases it seems like America's buying into it. In other cases, it seems like America's not buying into it. There's a lot of confusion out there. People. There's a whole segment that seems to have an affinity for Trump, but they loathe the idea of Donald Trump himself. So they have to be vocally opposed to it.
Well, we don't have to like Trump to be the beneficiaries of his policies and his program. I mean, let's admit it. I mean, he's caustic, he's brash, he's arrogant, he can be obnoxious. And I just described pretty much every New Yorker that there is out there. And I'm not taking a slight at New Yorkers because my family's from New York.
Right.
You know, my grandmother sounds like Donald Trump. She couldn't utter a sentence without dropping the F word in it. So I think sometimes this is offensive to our sensibilities. And then when the media doubles down on it, this is where we're getting the claims of racism, bigotry, misogyny, etc. But there's no justification for it. But at the end of the day, is he obnoxious and a narcissist? He certainly can be, and that doesn't play well with the tender and soft-hearted.
But in order to be the President of the United States, you have to be. We just did the release of the new book, I Am Cyrus, which is the Harry Truman story. And Truman was the president when I was born. And then Eisenhower came along, and we've got another faith-based story about Eisenhower that they want us to cover. All of them throughout history, every president has had issues, whether or not with their wife, with their family, with their country, with their community. This is not, if you want to be revered, I don't think we've really revered a president since what? I mean, we love Lady Bird, but we didn't like Lyndon. Maybe FDR. And he was not a blemish-free president.
Absolutely not.
And maybe that's the whole point, is that people just don't know what they don't. I mean, they love JFK, but they also know that he was a scoundrel.
Rabbi, almost every president in this country's history that's been effective has been a real piece of work. When FDR had a stroke and died, he was in the presence of his mistress. You know, Bill Clinton had teams of Secret Service agents to run his women for him, his jogging club. And LBJ, the same thing. LBJ had a button in the Oval Office that he could push, and that would allow him to notify his FBI detail in case Lady Bird was coming in there if there was an intern in the office. All throughout history, we've seen this. And I'm not advocating the philandering behavior, but the reality of it is, in order to be president, you've got to be somewhat of obnoxious, conceited, arrogant, and a narcissist. And a lot of them do, in fact, have backgrounds, including some of the Republicans. So it would be immature and naive to suggest otherwise. But in this tender, emasculated day that we live in, where we have militant feminism, that is something which has been so demonized, but yet, and it should have been, but not politically speaking necessarily. You're talking about a man operating on the national stage that's standing in defiance of the Russians. Can you imagine for one moment if we have Iranian tankers or the Iranians attacking tankers, pardon me, and you've got Mayor Pete as president, or Kamala Harris as president, or God forbid, Elizabeth Warren as president? No, you need somebody, and a lot of them have been this way, that were very, very, very wily. Even Ronald Reagan. Why do you think the hostages in Iran were released shortly after his inauguration? They feared this guy who they thought was a real cowboy. We get the same thing with George Bush II. All throughout history, it's been that way. It's the softer, kinder, gentler Jimmy Carter type of a methodology that has gotten this country on the brink of war multiple times and has offered many, many, many political disasters.
It's amazing to me how uninformed, I talk about biblical illiteracy, but political illiteracy is on a par with biblical illiteracy, that people just don't understand They don't care to understand. They take their sound bites out of the media, which you and I are both a part of. We fight against that because we try to err on the side of truth. We look at all sides of this situation. There's the pluses, there's the negatives, and we try to bring a balanced view to this situation. We're talking with Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. This is a read that you will find to be, if you have any interest in American history, take your history book and you put it to the side, because none of the things contained in Michael's book are in your high school or even in your college history books. They are little known myths and little known oddities about America. Nuggets, entertaining nuggets. It is really, it's just a gold mine of interesting, some very significant, some kind of insignificant but humorous tales that are contained in the book. And you can visit him at heartofamerica.net. Catch his podcast every morning, and you will find somebody who you can relate to from a very strong conservative, Christian, historical, constitutionalist with an opinion, and someone who is willing to voice that. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in our conversation during this Heart of America hour right here on Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, welcoming you into this Heart of America Hour, co-hosted by my dear friend Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Michael, welcome back into your segment of this program that now airs in over 120 countries, worldwide, prime time in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, and growing exponentially. And glad to have you as a part of the family. As you and I have been friends for many, many years, done a lot of talk, many hours behind the microphone together on talk radio, and one of my dear, trusted, and close friends. And so good to see you here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We've got Barr coming into the role of Attorney General. He's got a pretty daunting task in front of him. First, the Mueller investigation, which I don't understand, and I've asked legal experts, how can you obstruct justice if there is no crime? And the answer is you can't. So if there was no crime, if there was no evidence in there that there was collusion, then all these other things are just diversionary, and they're no big deal. If there was a crime and there was a prosecution and a conviction and you obstructed all that, well, they say then that would come into play. But there's nothing there. It's kind of like the Jedi, there's nothing here to see. Let's move on. But I do believe that Barr is going to be tasked, or is tasked, with the investigation that never took place into Hillary Clinton, into Debbie Wasserman Schultz, into the servers, into the emails, into the Clinton Foundation. But we're not hearing a whole lot about that. So we're still hearing about Comey. We're still hearing about other players engaged in this ridiculous, the FISA abuse, all that stuff. If you listen to Mark Levin, if you listen to any of the conservative pundits, they're telling you that the whole system, even Jay Sekulow is saying that this system has been violated. Napolitano, who hasn't even been favorable to Trump lately, who's been talking about that there's issues there, still says there was FISA abuse. When will all this come crashing down? Will it come crashing down the 3 weeks before, like the Comey announcement did, right before the election? Will this be a strategically played trump card, if you will, against a stacked Democratic hand? What's your opinion on that?
It would be pretty much speculation on my part. We're in a place politically in this country where people such as yourself, such as me, and the national news media, we can speculate on these things all day long, but in reality, the situation is entirely fluid. Bill Barr is charged with obviously these investigations. We've got the accusations of the obstruction of justice, when in actuality what they're saying is obstruction of an investigation, and they're trying to sell the point that they're the same thing. And even if he did obstruct an investigation, it wouldn't be. But the bottom line here is we don't know how Bill Barr is going to act. You know, back when Kennedy was president, Bobby was his AG. Bobby ran blocker for him, the women, the drugs, the pain pills, his health, etc. And then you have that long period of time in history where you don't really see an attorney general act as the bodyguard for the president until we get the introduction of Eric Holder under Barack Obama. So we've more or less redefined the role of AG in this country. And I think that Barr's main purpose was to be the anti-Mueller. With that said, you have a lot of inside the Beltway shenanigans that they're going to have to make a determination, and this goes back to Trump's lack of experience inside the Beltway, as to how many of their own they are willing to feed to the system in order to get to those that in fact had colluded in whatever activities they did. Because if we're going to work with the belief or the assumption that everybody who's a GOP conservative in D.C. is clean or pristine, we would be wrong about that. There's a lot of different heads that are going to roll, so they're going to have to temper and measure their response and how far Barr goes, predicated on the political damage they might do to themselves along the way. And only time is going to be able to tell how that plays out, Rabbi.
You know, it's so interesting that every House seat comes up in 2020 for re-election. So that's 435 election seats up for grabs. So, you know, will it go back to the Republican control? Will it stay with a Democratic control? I mean, that's up for grabs based on the candidates. You know, the fact that in Alabama we elected a Democratic senator is startling. Looking at the fact that Roy Moore's name is thrown back into the hat again makes me want to say, is this really the best we can do? I've known him for a long time, but is his time come and gone? And do we need to start putting up candidates who are going to affect change? This has been the most ineffectual Congress, I think, in American history, where their entire focus has been shifted away. I haven't heard Mitch McConnell speak in weeks. I just haven't seen him anywhere. Is he still around?
As far as we know, he did go all Ruth Bader Ginsburg on us for a while, though. Not dissimilar from Sarah Sanders.
Right.
But, you know, can I toss something out which is purely speculation, but something I think people need to realize? Talking about the re-election of these House members and all the influence that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is putting on the old mustache Pete's, if you will, which is a reference to the old days in the mafia. If people read the book Unknown America, they would know this, and maybe they know it already, but you do not have to be a member of the House of Representatives to be a Speaker of the House. It has not ever happened in this country, but can you imagine for one moment if somehow, whether it be subliminally or not, the Democrat infrastructure telegraphed to the country, re-elect us, keep us in power, and we will consider the election of a Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton to run the House of Representatives? That's never been attempted before, but it is constitutionally legal. And so there's a lot of different places, because right now the gloves are off. They hate Trump that much, they may very well willing to at least project that they're willing to consider going there. And again, it can't even really meet any legal challenges, because nothing in the Constitution demands that the Speaker be elected to the House. And so there's a lot of things we're going to see as the election gets closer and closer and closer that we've never seen in this country before.
The whole shift in narrative about throwing out the Electoral College, you know, if you look at the maps, you see that means that California, New York, and Florida, and I think Illinois and Texas elect our new president, and your vote and my vote play no role in it. And so based on the population centers, and that's never going to happen. That's a constitutional amendment that
Right.
requires 75% of the states to agree to that. And, you know, I'm sure that California and New York and Texas would love to agree to it because then they get to pick the president. But the other states are not going to agree to it. So it's just, but yet people are still talking about it as if it's something that should be done. And it seems to be a platform point is re-examine the Electoral College of America to see how we elect people. Paul Ryan, in my opinion, was a miserable failure as Speaker of the House. I don't know that Newt Gingrich takes a whole lot of heat for, quote unquote, ruining American politics when he was Speaker of the House. But Newt's still around, and he's still a strong voice in the inside the Beltway American political scene. This role of Speaker of the House seems to have taken on a whole different meaning than maybe when I was younger. Politics has taken on a whole different pallor, if you will. And what concerns me is, and I'm going to caveat this by saying that I'm not an Islamophobe. I am a student of sociology. And as a student of sociology, I look at sociological patterns that have historically taken place in migration and immigration patterns and how people became in control of a nation not through acts of war. And there is the Islamization of Europe did not happen because of a war. The Islamization of Europe happened because of immigration and migration. And the resettlement of refugees and the very deliberate migration path all the way to Norway and to Sweden and to the Scandinavian nations of a very deliberate effort to increase the percentage of the population. Now, for the first time, we have two very strong Muslim voices in Washington, and they are getting a tremendous amount of press time because the press is so keen on making sure that they're giving the underdog, the minority voice, the majority platform, which has been the pattern of the liberal media for decades now, is that we're the nation of the underdog, the voice of the underdog. This is about to usher in something that we don't want, that people are not aware of what's happened in other countries. The fact that a Bernie Sanders can refer to a Venezuela in any positive manner is mind-boggling to me, that we could even be talking about socialism in America when there is not a successful, in the history of mankind, there has never been a successful socialist model. Even the Israeli model, which was quasi-socialist by having the kibbutz as being a center of life where people live together, work together, shared equally in the proceeds. There was no position. The manager and the garbage, they all got paid the same thing. Right. That's even migrated and morphed into more capitalistic model of Moshav, even though there's still, the kibbutz still exists, but the government is not socialist. It's there is a national insurance system, a national health carrier, and they will tell you it's difficult in Israel. They'll tell you it's difficult in Canada to get quality health care if you need a specialty. Average general, you don't feel good, that's okay, you can go see a doctor. But if you have something really wrong with you, you could be waiting like the problems we have with the Veterans Administration, which was the VA is kind of a quasi-socialist model that every veteran would get health care provided. But look at the integrity of that system. So if we can't manage it on the micro level, how could we possibly manage it on the macro level?
Well, obviously you can't, but it certainly sounds great. And in the few places that you've had even a modicum of success in a socialist nation, it's been more or less a matter of policies that have been successful, again, in a micro version. Also, these are economies which are very frequently not international players on the economic level. They certainly don't provide the nation with, the Fed reserves, and they're not, their GDPs aren't what they're supposed to be. In Canada, you can wait up to 6 months for certain emergency surgeries, as you pointed out. They've been a dismal failure, but they play very well. But to give you an idea of how bad it can really be, Ilhan Omar, a few weeks ago, is tweeting about people finally falling in line with her progressive ideologies. Yes, you're pointing out that she's a Muslim. How in the world can you be progressive and supportive of the LGBT community? Then you have a representative here who's a Muslim, and in the Muslim nations, it's punishable by death. At the exact same time, President Obama has appointed a medical panel to help defeat the AIDS epidemic. None of it makes any sense. None of it matches up. So all of a sudden, I'm over here about what is a progressive Muslim? Muslims are, you want to talk about alt-right conservative, you don't get a whole lot more biblically conservative than a Muslim. And so this idea that I'm going to say this one thing over here to get reelected, but at the end of the day, you can fly your rainbow flags all day long, but we would have thrown you off a building in Basra. It's mind-numbing to me. But then again, as you point out, it speaks to the ignorance of the American people and how so many of them are getting their news from Yahoo and Snapchat.
It's, again, you and I spent much time discussing the election and the time leading up to the election of what the American populace were talking about, who Donald Trump was, who he is. He has proven to be everything we thought he was. There have been absolutely no surprises whatsoever in these 2.5 years since he's taken office. Is there anything that shocked you about anything he said or done during these 2.5 years?
I think I'm more shocked at the response by people towards the president. Imagine what he could have accomplished if he had even a measure of support from the Democrat Party. But for those of us that voted for him, I know very few people out there that are disappointed. We're disappointed in things like the wall, but that was obviously beyond his ability without support from the House of Representatives. But he's fulfilled so many of his campaign promises. The ones he's not fulfilled, he continues to struggle and work towards. So no, there's really been nothing. The only thing that's really surprised me about Trump is the continual willingness to punch at people on things like Twitter. There have been times where I felt like, he could have postured that a little bit differently. He didn't have to respond to that necessarily, but he seems to really be enjoying himself. And I'll tell you something else. I got probably right now 2 friends that work in the White House. And these are people whose opinions that I trust without exception. And neither one of them has told me anything negative about this president. What you see is what you get. He's proven himself to be extremely affable time and time and time again in private. The public Donald Trump and the private Donald Trump, they're not necessarily dissimilar. When a lot of other administrations, they certainly are. He's just at the end of the day what he is. Again, he's a New Yorker, he's a Northerner, he's obnoxious, and sometimes we don't like his behavior, but his policies have been spot on. He's done what he was elected to do. So as far as my disappointment's coming from the Democrat Party and their willingness to trip him up at every single measure, which proves to me they're more concerned about with ousting him than fixing the homeless problem in Detroit or New York, and especially in California.
That's right there. You have a Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco area with people defecating on the street, the potential for a very, very, very high potential of a bubonic plague outbreak because of the amount of human feces and the amount of rodent population linked to that, which were the same conditions that existed when the plague first appeared and wiped out communities. So there is no taking care of the country. There's no focus on making America great again. It is these political agendas, and it is the Trump and anything which is steeped in negativity, anything which is anti. Look, we were anti-war, anti-Vietnam. We had the right message, but handled it the wrong way. We were opposed to a government getting involved in an economic war that France drug us into. I'm still mad at France. I don't even fly there anymore. I go to Frankfurt, and for a Jew to go to Germany as opposed to France, it tells you a lot as to how upset I am about the French and what goes on with them. But here we have these communities which are eroding, but yet the states, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, voting against abortion, Ohio, voting, now new laws coming in which are going to bubble up to the Supreme Court. Roe v. Wade is going to be tested, and you know, I don't know that it's going to be next year or the year after. It's going to take a while for people to first to have these policies implemented, then for them to be enforced, then to be challenged, and for somebody to bubble up and take it all the way through the system. But I do believe that Roe v. Wade is going to come up and be contested in the Supreme Court. Who's going to be on that Supreme Court? We still have a year and a half. I don't know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to make it another year and a half. That means we could have a second seat, but can he get a candidate through? I think he can get it through the Senate, which is where he has to get it through, but it's going to take all of the Republican senators to get behind him in order for something to happen. The Republicans who are in the Senate that are not supporting the agenda, how can they possibly expect to get reelected?
I don't know that they can, because I also think that if he wins 2020, I think he's going to take the gloves off. And just like we saw in the state of Alabama, you know, the voters are rising up in certain parts of the country. This comes down to who wins the propaganda battles, because you're right about Roe versus Wade. You know, the Supreme Court's got about 2 weeks left in this particular session. They still have to rule on gerrymandering as well as citizenship on the ballot, or on the census report. It's going to be very interesting to see where they come down constitutionally and conservative-wise. But at the end of the day, if they do, it's going to send a very clear signal to a lot of Republicans that might be on the bubble that you better fall in line. And that's one thing that Trump needs to demand of the party, just like Pelosi demands it. And she's done so effectively, but because she's got the AOCs of the world. But I think once we get past the re-election, you're going to see an entirely different climate. Now, can we hold on to the Senate? I think we will. Can we overturn the House? Quite frankly, it's going to be a challenge. But I think a lot of Republicans, at least from what I'm hearing, Rabbi, are understanding that Trump is the future of the party, or at least the ideologies, and they had better fall in line, because states are telegraphing that they are willing to go to greater lengths than they would before to make certain that their interests were represented. And again, real quickly, I know we're getting tight on time, people need to realize that back in the day, senators were elected by the respective state legislatures and not the citizens. It's the responsibility of the senators to represent the needs of the state. If the states will stand up and make certain that their senators, understand that dichotomy and enforce it, you might see a lot more people falling in line.
Well, I hope that's the case, and I want to see America prosper. We have, you and I are aging. I will see my 70th birthday during the next election cycle and the next term of the president. That means I'll have gone from Truman to whoever in my lifetime, and it's been a pendulum swing from one end of the spectrum to the other, from the Vietnam War to the war in Iraq to what's going on now with these, the same kind of Cold War going on with Iran, but now there's, I think they're more dangerous than the former Soviet Union ever was. and because of the religious zealot aspect that's part of that equation. Khrushchev was never religious. He was just a political entity. But we thank you, Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. You can find Michael at heartofamerica.net and tune in every day, Monday through Friday from
9 a.m. Eastern until about 10:30 Eastern at heartofamerica.net, as you point out.
There you go. Catch his podcast and get his book, and we will see you next month. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.